We're running? We're running. Okay. I didn't really know that. Ja, video verdelen. Okay. Okay, so let's take this concept of organizational change, right? In essence, when we think of organizations, it's nothing more than actually, and don't mind the other flip chart, I'll get to that. In essence, when we talk about organizations, we talk about a bunch of people within that organization. The people that at a certain time, yes, and when we talk about change, this is going to be crazy, but when we talk about change, what we mean by changing an organization is that we want to change the habits of the people within the organization. There's truly nothing more to say than that. We want to change the behavior, the small little routines that people exhibit. So we want to change those habits or their behavior. Now, what I like to do is I like to represent that behavior as a collective, right? So at any given moment in time, your people within the organization, they exhibit a certain kind of current behavior. And I've been explaining this a lot to people within organizations, that this is what we perceive, right? Behind current behavior, we'll not dwell into that type of topic, but behind that current behavior, there is a set of thoughts and there is a set of emotions, a set of feelings. But what you see, what you get on the floor, what you see in the office is the current behavior. So this is interesting because that current behavior often is labeled as the undesired, right? The undesired. In the eyes of somebody who wants to create the change. Now, that means that there is somewhere outside of this undesired behavior a set of behaviors which would be desired. All right? And this set of desired behaviors, let me just give you one example. One of the things I often see is that there is a old way of looking at the jobs we do, and that's typically a result-oriented way, right? We only care about the final result. And there is a new way we'd like people to join us when we talk about change in organization. That is where we'd like to look at, where we'd like them to look not only at the results, right? So this could be by example. I'm not saying that this is your example, but this could be, for example, result oriented, and this would be, right, a will to have people who are more process oriented. So people who ask questions about why things went well or didn't, right? Here you don't care about why. You just care about on time, not on time. You don't ask the further questions. But also you can't solve because you're always in firefighting mode because you only care about the results. If you want people to look at the process, you want them to be in a questioning mode. You want them to be looking for the whys. Now, this is a kind of a very general change thing that's going on right now in a lot of organizations, is where we want people to be more process oriented. So let's just take that as an example. What actually is interesting at this moment is the way I see change through my lens and through my experience, is that this circle here exactly this circle that, I'll do it a little bit more thick, so otherwise you won't be able to see it. I need to take my thick marker. This circle here, which delimits the boundaries of the current behavior, the old behavior, is really seen as a limiting circle. I, as a person in that team, cannot see beyond that circle. You're asking of me something which is beyond my point of sight. It's like it's behind the corner. I cannot see it because I've got a wall here. Literally, I've got a brick wall, right? So I've got a wall and I cannot see what is behind that wall. That wall, literally in our brains, is seen as highways. The best way to think of that wall is to think in terms of highways. How does that work? In our brains, our current behavior doesn't take a lot of energy, right? I know how this marker works. I need to take off the cap like that. So that's really easy for my brain. I had to study it once, but now that I know it, I know that this is the movement. I know that this is the easiest movement. I'm not supposed to pull like this, right? The easiest movement is to bend my arms again. And that behavior I repeat, right? Because I've learned, so I repeat that kind of behavior because it takes very little energy in my brain. And to understand change is basically to understand the energy management of our brains. So this is a representation of my brain, like this, right? With this being the front here, with my prefrontal cortex, and this here, the red part, the instinctive part, being here, the lobe at the end, right? Which takes care of some instinctive mechanisms. Now, a brain representation is always oversimplified. So if you're looking at my colors here and you think like, oh, but I've seen pictures that look completely different, of course, right? And the colors, do they mean anything? Well, the brain is just the brain. It's one big mass, and the colors are just an oversimplified model to highlight a couple of working principles, by which I mean there is no way to say that, oh, this part of the brain does that and that part of the brain does this. The brain always works as an entity, and that entity has one main concern, that is to minimize energy consumption. Minimum energy consumption, right? So in order to have minimum energy consumptions, our brains create patterns, and patterns are like highways. We've taken the road once, right? So we've taken the road once at a certain point of opening this cap, and my brain just understands that this is a very easy way to do it. So it kind of creates a bigger road, and at one point a highway. And what happens actually is that in one part of our brain, which we could call a certain emotional learning part, right, which is often referred to as system 1 or is referred to as the limbic system, which is a learning capability over our years from birth through childhood. We have created certain highways that taught us how to open doors. The fact that I need to open the door downwards when I see a doorknob is a very typical one. The fact that when we hear a car, we expect a moving object, right? The fact that when we see a sad face, we have a certain response to that sad face. When we see an angry face, we have a certain response to that angry face. And it even goes a little bit further, because we might say that over the decades, over the generations, the things that were most interesting were just passed on through our genes, right? So the effect that we are by default scared of heavy noise, high-pitched noise, it puts us in a state of alertness. We didn't necessarily hear a lot of strange noises when we were a baby before the first time we reacted like that. It is kind of an inherent pattern that we just got from our genes. So this learning part of our brain, which is programmed to react in an automatic way, this is why this is the automatic part of the brain. All of this, you could say, right, kind of just goes on interpreting, looking at what happens outside of us, and then perceiving that and putting out an automatic response, allows us to have a very efficient energy consumption because it's just repeating itself, right? And as long as it's repeating itself, this is great. We don't need to go outside of the wall. We know what's inside. We know the highway, and we just do what we did in the past. So the learning worked up until now, right? I've always been result driven, right? Listen to the words. I've always done it that way, right? My brain just knows that this is the easiest way to get to a result. So I've always thought like this. Why would I go outside of this wall? Well, we have the capacity to go outside of the wall, right? We have the capacity to be adaptive. And literally that part of the brain that takes care of us when our previous highways don't offer solutions sits right behind our forehead here. Often it's called the system 2 or the prefrontal cortex. And of course, it's not only this or that. So I've put it in a little bit in a gray zone so you understand that it's a bit more complicated than that. But for our understanding of organizational change, it's important to know that going behind the wall requires to break up these bricks, right? Breaking up the bricks can be achieved when we move into adaptive mode. Now, what is adaptive mode? Adaptive mode is when you all of a sudden have an insight and you go and you say to yourself, whoa, I've never looked at it like that, right? You might be for days trying to solve a puzzle, right? In a computer game. And all of a sudden, your brain connects two pieces that it already had, puts them together, right? Exactly here, makes a new connection, makes a new road, and builds the possibility of giving you a solution. So adaptive thinking means looking at all the pieces and then letting the brain the energy it needs so that it can assemble it to a new way of looking at things. It is absolutely not the minimum energy. It requires a lot of energy, and it requires peace, and it requires calm. So if we want to move from this treadmill, which the automatic brain actually is, like it's like a treadmill. It just goes on and on and on and on. I know how to do this. I know how to do this. Right? Here I am. I'm in my current behavior. If we want to move from that piece and we want to go into here, we need to give our brains the energy, and we need to give them the peace and the calm, right? So that they can do that. So if we want to take a walk, let's say right here, and I want to take a walk down this new path through the woods, right, and create a new road into my prefrontal cortex, all of the other ones need to be at peace. So my instincts need to be set quiet, so there cannot be any danger, or the level of danger has to be really psychologically safe. I need to feel safe, right? That's why your best moments of insight, your most adaptive thoughts, your most creative thoughts come when you are completely at ease, like under the shower, or when you're taking a pee, or when you're driving home, for example, and your road is free, right? So that's when this magic happens. You take a walk down the adaptive part of your brain. And when you do that, actually, um, you start breaking the wall, right? You start building roads. And here's the interesting part of organizing easy change within your organization. The more you allow to break up the wall, the easier it is to go outside of the current thinking and behavior. So in traditional, right, and I'll draw this in, let's say, gray. I'll draw it in gray. In traditional change management, the way I've always been taught is that what you do when you want people to go from here to there is that you create the boundaries, right? And you say along which roads they will have to move, right? So this is the traditional, you could say that this is the traditional approach. And surely you've heard of those 7-step model or 4-step model, whatever. Yes, it's linear. It goes from here to there in a couple of steps along these boundaries. Now, this is not how the brain actually works, because the moment we set boundaries and we create a wall, our brain goes like, okay, but I was supposed to bring down the walls. You told me to go there. And now that I'm doing this, now that I'm trying to experiment, you're telling me that there are walls again. So I need to go back to something that works. Remember, this is the place where you know it works. This is the place where you create. You don't know what works here, right? You need to still to find out. So the way this actually helps you to understand change is that the more often you go and you make paths along automatic to adaptive mode, the easier it becomes. See it like this. If I allow, right, 10 of these, right, it becomes easier for my brain. It's like a muscle. The more I train it, the less energy it requires. So the easier that change becomes. And what happens when it becomes easier is actually that people start building a bit firmer roads here. Like the first time you hike through the woods, you see a little trail, but as the trail gets popular and more people go over the trail, it widens and it becomes like this little bike road. And then all of a sudden somebody says, hey, let's pave it out because people love this trail, so let's put some concrete on it. And before you know it, it becomes like a huge connection between two desired places, and you've got all of a sudden, you've got a highway, you've got a new highway. So the idea is to exercise the muscle without bringing new boundaries. How do you do that? Well, you allow any experimentation, even if it is not in the desired way, right? That would mean, for example, that even if people start asking questions about, okay, but what if I understand we're result driven, right? And you want me to be process driven, but what if we take a different approach? What if we, for example, say that we don't do result, we don't do process, we just focus on the feeling behind it, right? Let's be feeling driven. Let's be feeling driven. What about feeling, right? All of a sudden, we've got this new idea. If you as a change leader at that moment miss the opportunity to say, hey, great, let's explore feeling. How would our company look if we would all be feeling driven? And just allow all of these links, right? All of these neuronal paths to be created, these new paths to be created. You actually miss the opportunity to build on those paths to strengthen these paths, right? It is important to see that what is happening here is that as you allow people to experiment actually in all directions with change, you enlarge their scope. Enlarging the scope. So, what does that mean? That means that all of the sudden, things that previously seemed impossible to me, right? Roads that I didn't know about, all of a sudden become accessible. And they become aware, or they become accessible in the span of my minimum energy consumption. So my awareness grows, right? I become more open to change because I've been allowed to explore change. As my awareness grows, so this is like growing the awareness, growing awareness. And mark out that this goes in all directions. So I'm not necessarily concerned with growing awareness in one direction. I'm concerned with growing awareness in all directions. Because the more I grow awareness, the easier it becomes for people to see the potential benefits of the desired awareness, right? We move naturally into discovery of the desired approach, of the desired outcome, when we are allowed to experiment in all directions. And in adverse to a traditional approach, it actually gives me one big benefit. It gives me the big benefit that, given the fact that we've set out this vision, this strategy at a certain point, but we don't know necessarily in what way the next strategy will go. So maybe the next strategy will be somewhere around here, right? So this is strategy plus one, let's say, right? This was the strategy where we currently want to go, and strategy plus one, the next one goes there. The fact that we've created a workforce that has a expanded awareness allows us all of a sudden to move much faster, right, from strategy to strategy plus one, because hey, we've actually already explored that direction. It's not something all of a sudden, all out of the blue, something new. We have already created the pathways that will ease the next transition. This is the type of thinking that I strongly believe that we should be giving our kids, that we should be giving our youth. Exactly, when we tell them we don't know what jobs will be awaiting for you, we don't know what kind of habits we will need from you within 5 or 10 or 15 years. This growing awareness is the only set of skills we can actually give them that will make the not knowing less frightening for them.